So I'm happy now to begin the second part of our session on employee engagement, on retention and recruitment. And Scott Fiore, who is Vice President and Partner at TriStar Staffing, is going to go through this part of the presentation. Scott is an absolute expert on what's happening in this immediate area in employment and on trends that are happening here as well as nationally. So I think you're going to come away with some very, very helpful tactics about how you can retain and recruit in this environment, which is a very difficult environment for finding good people. So Scott Fiore.
So let's get going here. What I'm going to talk about is how we got to where we were, a little bit what Kae did. There's some overlap, so I'll skip through that. And then I'm going to try to give you a sense of how we got to this labor market that we're in. I will make an assumption that many of you are having difficulty finding employees in this market. Everybody is. Some people don't have as much trouble. They're good employers, or they're better employers, but even they're having trouble. I'm going to try to give you a sense and really set the stage and hopefully give you some ideas of why we're in the predicament that we're in, and hopefully give you some tools that you can use to mitigate that. There's 5 generations in the workforce, or in the workplace today. This is a little small, I'll explain it. Traditionalists, I'll call traditionalists those born before 1946. They're only about 2% of the workforce. There's probably not many, if any, in the room today. They have a get-her-done attitude. Think about when they were born. They thrive within traditional organizations. They stayed in their hometown. This generation didn't, for the most part. There's always going to be some exceptions. But for the most part, they stayed close. If they moved somewhere, they moved down the street or across the street. And they considered paying their dues essential. They knew that they had to go into a job and pay their dues. And that would hopefully reward them in the future. What do they remember? Think about, and this is what I want you to think about as we get later in my talk and later generations. What do they remember? Things like Mickey Mouse, Pearl Harbor, World War II, big bands, radio, no TV back then, the Lone Ranger, jukeboxes. Who do they remember? The heroes of the day, Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Joe DiMaggio. So think about that. And as we go through here, I want you to think back to this slide and the one before it and the one before it. So now you have baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 64. This is the group that invented the 60-hour work week. They see retirement more as a beginning and not an end. They've been working for that retirement. After baby boomers, you have my generation, Gen X, born between 1965 and 1977. More independent, more entrepreneurial. We were the latchkey kids because both of our parents were working because they wanted to live in the villages. So we came home and nobody was there. High rates of divorce. I'm very concerned about work-life balance because I saw my parents just work their butts off. For what? The villages. We're impatient and waiting to assume leadership because the baby boomers can't retire, a lot of them, because their 401ks are decimated. And the example I like to use is this is Prince Charles. Is that guy ever going to get to be king? What do we remember? And now you may start to see some differences. 3 Mile Island, Iran hostage affair, the Challenger disaster, AIDS, MTV, Commodore 64 as an Atari, the first computer starting to come out, The Simpsons. It's not Mickey Mouse, it's The Simpsons. And the original Star Wars movie, which I would argue is the best. Who do we remember? Ronald Reagan, Kurt Cobain, Julius Erving, Pee Wee Herman, Kristen McAuliffe, the Muppets. See a little difference in the heroes? Okay? 40% of our parents were divorced. Now the millennials. And please don't yell at me later. It's more fun if I pick on you, okay? Even more entrepreneurial than my generation. And millennials, 1978 to 1995 is their birth time. Very tech savvy, interconnected through the internet. They use Wikipedia. They don't use those encyclopedias that you had to wait every year for the update to tell you what was new. They could just hit a button and they get everything at their fingertips. Teamwork, new levels of multitasking. Their brains are just trained to multitask. The economy that we're in now is a service-based technology. It's not a manufacturing-based technology anymore. There is certainly manufacturing, but we are really a service-based country. Look at what's being built: retail centers, restaurants, places for us to go buy stuff. That's what Americans do better than anybody in the world. Everybody's got a device. Trades and skilled professions require computers and often a 2 or 4 year degree. That didn't happen back in the days of the traditionalists and the boomers. You graduated high school, you went to work, the company trained you how to do your job, and everything was great. The industrial sector is just in upheaval. Everything is changing so quickly. And how do people keep up? Call centers moved to Asia, then they start to move back because we didn't like that. And now, who's in the grocery business? Amazon. My wife and I are of the opinion that we never have to set foot in a grocery store again, because this Peapod truck will show up and just literally bring it right into our house for us. And I bet if I would tip the guy a couple extra dollars, he'd probably put it away for me too. So now you've got different companies coming into different sectors. So Amazon, I believe, wants to be everywhere. I just read recently they're looking at health care now. And then there's this artificial intelligence thing, and this thing is really fascinating to me. What is that going to present for the future? I've talked to some futurists, I've talked to some economists. They don't think that robots are going to take over the world. Now, my son tells me that, what is it, Cyberdyne or whatever it was in a Terminator, we're all dead because the machines are going to take over. But I don't see that happening. I just think that the jobs we're all going to have are going to be very different than the jobs that we grew up watching. This workforce is less loyal. Go back to how I set the stage for this. And later, there'll be a sentence that pops up that might scare you a little bit. Classified newspaper ads have been replaced by social media, by LinkedIn, by Indeed.com, by CareerBuilder. There's all these different ways of identifying talent. When I got into the recruiting business, if a client needed a temporary employee and called us on Tuesday, we placed an ad that went in the paper that Sunday. So there was a 6 or 7 day wait before we could even start maybe getting new candidates into the pipeline for that job. Then they had to call us, and then we had to set them up for an appointment, and there's a delay in that. Now if a client calls us Tuesday at 9:03 a.m. with a job, we can be on the internet looking for and advertising that job literally within minutes or less. Millennials still want money. You read a lot about millennials, and they're the do-gooders, and they want the kumbaya crap and all that stuff. But they still are driven by money. They have often huge student loan debt loads. I came out of school with $12,000 of debt. I mean, people spend that at the drop of a hat today. We see kids come into our office right out of college with 6-figure debt loads. I mean, that was my first mortgage. So before they can start buying all the cool stuff they want to buy, like Netflix and their cell phone bill and all the things that are monthly charges, they got to pay the student loan debt. So they are still driven by money, and don't forget that. If you try to set up an environment that's all fun and ping pong tables and all that stuff, and are forgetting about and think you can get away without paying them, you're wrong. And those boomers aren't in a hurry to leave. Think of Queen Elizabeth. Charles is still waiting, and I don't see her. I think Prince William's going to be king before Charles is. Constant recruiting is required in this market. You should always be looking for someone, whether you have an open position or not, because trust me, often several of your good people now are looking or being sought after, and especially when you don't have an opening. It's best to be recruiting when you're in a position of strength, when you don't need someone. And then just line those people up so when something happens, you can go to them and you can go to them quickly.